السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. حياة تسخر بالتحولات التي أدت إلى اغتياله. رجل كان الأكثر تأثيرا في الأمريكيين من أصول أفريقية، الحاج مالك الشباز أو مالكوم إكس من الداخل. معكم زينب صفار، تابعونا. لعله أحد أعظم القادة الأمريكيين من أصول أفريقية والأكثر تأثيرا في التاريخ كما يرى النقاد، هو الداعية الإسلامي المعروف بمالكوم إكس أو الحاج مالك الشباز، الأمريكي الأصل والجنسية. ولد مالكوم إكس بمدينة ديترويت في 19 من أيار مايو عام 1925 في أسرة فقيرة قتل عائلها في حادث عنصري، وكانت هذه الفترة في أمريكا شديدة الاضطراب بسبب التمييز العنصري البغيض بين البيض والسود. تحلى بالنباهة والثورية والقدرة الإقناعية حتى أيقظ وحفز الثقة التي أعادت ربط الأمريكيين من أصول أفريقية بميراثهم الأفريقي. تكلم بما لم يستطيعوا أن يتفوهوا به، وعبر عن مكنوناتهم بطريقته العالية النبرة والصدامية، وامتاز بأنه يخاطب الناس باللغة التي يفهمونها. كان أكثر فعالية في التعبير عن اللامساواة من معظم حركات الحقوق المدنية الرسمية، وكان عنصرا فاعلا في نشر الإسلام في المجتمعات الأفريقية في الولايات المتحدة الأمريكية. أبدى مالكوم كفاءة دعوية فائقة، وزار الجامعات والحدائق والسجون وأماكن تجمع الناس، وأسلم على يديه الكثيرون منهم الملاكم العالمي محمد علي كلاي، وفتحت له قنوات التلفاز أبوابها، وعقد المناظرات على الهواء وذاع صيته بقوة. تحولت أفكار مالكوم إكس ومعتقداته تحولا جذريا خلال حياته، ولا سيما بعد ذهابه إلى الحج عام 1960، حيث التقى العلماء والمشايخ وقابل الملك فيصل وجمال عبد الناصر وشيخ الأزهر. فعندما كان متحدثا باسم حركة أمة الإسلام كان ينشر أفكار التفرقة بين الأمريكيين البيض والسود، ويغذي أفكار العنصرية لديهم. أما بعدما ترك الحركة عام 1964 فقد ابتعد عن العنصرية والتفرقة، وأعرب عن رغبته بالعمل مع دعاة الحقوق المدنية، حتى انتهت مسيرته باغتياله في 21 من شباط فبراير عام 1965 أثناء إلقائه محاضرة في جامعة نيويورك، فمات على الفور وكان في 40 من عمره. المدافع العالمي عن حقوق الانسان والكاتب ومحرر موقع بلاك أجندا ريبورت أجامو براكا، وفي الذكرى 50 لاغتيال مالكوم إكس، ماذا يقول في شخصيته ومقاربته المثيرة للجدل؟ وهل سيشهد العالم اليوم شخصية مثل مالكوم إكس، ولا سيما في ظل تصاعد وتيرة الأحداث العنصرية ضد الأمريكيين من أصول أفريقية في المجتمع الأمريكي؟ Internationally recognized human rights defender Ajamo Baraka, welcome to The Inside to talk about the life and meaning of Malcolm X on the occasion of the 50th anniversary for his assassination.
Yes, thank you. It's my pleasure to be here.
It's our pleasure, sir. Well, Al-Hajj Malik Al-Shabaz, or Malcolm Little, Malcolm X, who is this person and how do you describe him from whatever you've known about Malcolm X?
I think it's important for everyone to remember that Malcolm X was a black revolutionary. Malcolm X in his life exemplified the highest expression of black internationalism, anti-colonialism, anti-imperialism. He was an individual who gave his life to the struggle. His life sort of captured all of the contradictions of living in the U.S. as a colonial subject, and all of the potential. When one comes into consciousness, it becomes a revolutionary supporter of the people.
He has been called one of the greatest and most influential African Americans in history, yet his detractors, they described him as a person who instigated racism and violence.
Well, of course, I mean, whenever you talk about confronting white supremacy, when you talk about the decolonizing the colonial subjects mentally, when you have a perspective of U.S. history that is different from the predominant narrative that suggests that the U.S. was some glorious republic committed to democracy, when in fact it was a racist, colonialist state guilty of genocide and enslavement, then you're going to be attacked by those defenders of the American myth. And Malcolm was of course, viciously attacked, even after he left the Nation of Islam and started his own organizations and really began to connect up the struggles of African people in North America with the entire world.
Now, before we go to talk further about the Nation of Islam that Malcolm has embraced while in prison, he was called Malcolm X, and I said that Malcolm Haj Malik al-Shabazz, Malcolm Little, Malcolm X. What does the X stand for?
The X stood for the fact that as captured and enslaved people, taken away from our homeland and our families, we didn't know our family names.
Okay.
So part of the reclaiming of one's humanity, of an expression of self-determination, was to basically embrace the X as the unknown factor, but also the factor that was leading one toward true liberation and true self-determination. So it's rejecting the history of the slave master who gave us their names, Smith or Jones or whatever.
Little or,
Little, Ball. He was rejecting that, the continuity of that history, and proclaiming a new history, a history that was characterized by individual and collective self-determination.
Right. Now, how did Malcolm X, this character, this person, first come to notice by the American public? There was a very important incident that was a turning point in his life.
Well, he became known to the American public primarily through his work with the Nation of Islam, which he joined in 1953 and was a very important figure in the nation. He became the national spokesperson for the Nation of Islam. He was primarily responsible for its tremendous growth in the 1950s and early 1960s. In that work, he became known to the American public, to the black population, and even to the U.S. government as someone to be feared.
There was a specific incident, which is the Hinton incident in 1957, when there was something happened to one of his colleagues, and then he went to the police station, and all the people were crowded outdoors, and with a single raise of his hand, he managed to disperse them.
That was one of the incidents that the authorities point to suggest that this one individual had too much power. When they, as a consequence of an attack on one of the Muslim brothers, they went to outside of the headquarters. They lined up to demonstrate their concern and opposition, and they noticed that when Malcolm came, and when Malcolm basically made that one gesture for them to leave, that everybody in order and
4,000 protesters
departed. And the authority said that it is very dangerous for one individual to have that kind of influence.
In 1998, the Time magazine named the autobiography of Malcolm X as one of the 10 most influential non-fiction books of the 20th century. Yes.
I think it was, because it was a book that captured a part of the U.S. story. Here was an individual who grew up in a family that was a family of immigrants, if you will. His father immigrated from the southern part of the U.S. To Canada, where he met his mother, who had immigrated from Grenada to Canada. They came to the U.S., they raised a family, they were destroyed in the U.S. The father was murdered, we think, by racists. The mother ended up in a mental institution. Malcolm ended up in foster homes, in a life of crime. And then he was able to transform himself and to become conscious of the oppressive script that was handed to him. A script that was going to result in him living a life that would be of very little value to anyone. When he became aware of that script, he was then able to reject it and to transform himself and to emerge as the articulator of the aspirations of black people who yearn for freedom. And so all of that was captured in that autobiography, this story of redemption, if you will. And it's something that many black people embraced and became a classic within the U.S.
Now, the transformation was started when with Malcolm X?
Well, it started when he was in prison, and when he was introduced to the teachings of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, who is the head of the Nation of Islam, who had a particular approach to Islam in the U.S. He was a black nationalist who believed in the uplift of black people, who saw themselves as a separate nation of people, if you will, who believed in the dignity of the black man and woman. And that resonated with Malcolm X because of his own background and the fact that both his mother and his father were part of the Garvey movement, which is also a militant black nationalist organization. So the connection was made, and that was the beginning of the process of the creation of Malcolm X.
He embraced the Nation of Islam and its teachings, but then he repudiated it. Why?
After Malcolm was in the nation for a while and he rose to prominence, and there were some conflicts, and he ended up having to leave the nation in 1964. He embraced the fact that he was exposed to a form of Islam that was not, as he said, authentic. That's what he made his Hajj, and he began to embrace the more authentic and orthodox understanding of Islam. He also had to leave the nation because he felt that he was constrained politically. Malcolm always understood that the struggle in the U.S. was connected to a worldwide struggle. And he understood also, too, that the nation and anyone who has some degree of consciousness had to be involved in the fight within the U.S. and really the worldwide fight against colonial domination. But the nation itself did not involve itself directly in those conflicts. And because Malcolm had this world perspective, he was greatly influenced, for example, by the Bandung Conference in 1955, where you had the leaders of the African nations and the Asian nations coming together and basically declaring themselves committed to the ending of European colonialism. He understood that was how the black struggle needed to be framed. But he was constrained from that, and that was another one of the reasons why he had to leave the nation in 1964, to really put into practice his understanding of what needed to take place, not only in the U.S., but worldwide.
Now, allow us, Ajamo, to stop for a short break, and then after the break we're going to discuss more the controversies that were always there whenever Malcolm X was mentioned.
Yes.
After the break. إذن فاصل قصير ونعود، لا تذهبوا بعيدا. الكثير من الجدل خيم على شخصية مالكوم إكس، إذ أنه كان منتقداً لحركة الحقوق المدنية، حيث لقب مارتن لوثر كينغ الابن بأنه ساذج، وقادة الحقوق المدنية الآخرين بأنهم تلامذة للمؤسسة البيضاء. كما أطلق على مسيرة واشنطن عام 1963 تسمية مهزلة واشنطن، وقال إنه لا يعلم السبب وراء كون الكثيرين من السود متحمسين للتظاهرة من قبل البيض أمام تمثال رئيس مات منذ 100 عام والذي لم يحبنا عندما كان حيا. وفي حين ناضلت حركة الحقوق المدنية ضد التمييز العرقي، دعا مالكوم إكس إلى الانفصال الكامل للأفارقة الأمريكيين عن البيض، واقترح على الأفارقة الأمريكيين العودة إلى أفريقيا، وأنه يجب خلق بلد منفصل للسود في أمريكا كتدبير مؤقت. المدافع العالمي عن حقوق الانسان أجامو براكا كيف يقرأ تلك المواقف النارية لمالكوم إكس.
That was the position of the Nation of Islam. It was the position of Malcolm X. It was a position that has a grounding in history. But of course, it did not correspond to the dominant narrative of the emerging civil rights movement. The civil rights movement was a movement that its primary objective was to win democratic rights for African American people, to allow African American people to fully realize their citizenship rights. Malcolm thought that was a ridiculous position, that whites were not going to allow that to happen, that who wanted to integrate into a racist system, and that black people really had no real reason to be a part of the U.S., and that black people, in order to be free, needed self-determination, they needed independence. So when people talk about, he says, when you talk about separation, what you're really talking about is independence. He believed that black people were a nation and they needed to be independent of the U.S. state. And of course that did not win him many friends in the civil rights movement.
Right, and according to experts, even today, that they say much of what Malcolm X said about the experiences of Black Americans remains true today. Are we going to, like in the wake of all the events that have been taking place in the U.S., is this going to bring about a character like Malcolm X that will make a change, especially in the wake of such racist incidents?
I think what we are seeing in the U.S. is the conditions being created for a movement like the movement that emerged in the 1960s. People have to remember that while Malcolm was a powerful figure, Malcolm was also part of the coming together of historical forces. There was movement taking place in the U.S. There was political struggle taking place in the U.S. And Malcolm's voice was a voice that gave life to certain kinds of trends developing. One trend that was part of the traditional black radical tradition was a trend that said that black people in the U.S. were never part of the U.S. Black people needed to be independent. Black people were part of a worldwide struggle against European white supremacy and capitalism, and that the real objective of struggle in the U.S. wasn't to become citizens, but to basically to dismantle the racist, oppressive system, to dismantle the American state. And that is a legitimate tendency, a legitimate trend that Malcolm gave voice to. The young people who are in the forefront of the struggles today are young people who are beginning to make those same kind of connections, understanding that you cannot address police violence in the U.S. unless you understand the role of the police. If you understand the role of the police is to contain and control the black population and poor people, then you can make the connection between the role of the U.S. military globally that is being used to control and contain and oppress people globally. So they're making those kinds of connections. Being inspired by the analysis of people like Malcolm X.
Right, and also he seems to have had a charismatic character, because he was responsible for the increase, in the dramatic increase in membership between the 1950s and 60s with the Nation of Islam. However, after his assassination, there were conflicting reactions from various prominent sides, yet some media outlets inside the US were harsh in their reaction. For instance, allow me here to quote, the New York Times wrote that Malcolm X was an extraordinary and twisted man who turned many true gifts to evil purpose, and that his life was strangely and pitifully wasted. The Time called him an unashamed demagogue whose creed was violence. Outside the US, and particularly in Africa, the press was sympathetic. The Daily Times of Nigeria said, for example, that Malcolm X will have a place in the Palace of Martyrs. And the Ghanaian Times likened him to John Brown and Patrice Lumumba, and counted him among, quote, a host of Africans and Americans who were martyred in freedom's cause. Also, the Guangming Daily, which is published in Beijing, stated that Malcolm was murdered because he fought for freedom and equal rights. Also in Cuba and in many other countries, they all had positive evaluations of this character. Why was he that hated in his own country and so much revered abroad?
I think that in the asking of the question, you almost answered
everything. Yes.
that basically he was revered by people who were involved in struggle, who were involved in anti-colonial fights, people who understood that we have a common enemy. It was his enemies in the U.S. that characterized him as a person who pushed hate. It was our enemies in the U.S. That wanted to make sure that his perspective, his lesson, his example was not emulated by the masses of the people. So the very fact that we're talking about Malcolm 50 years later suggests that it was his enemies who were the ones who were incorrect, and that the world embraced Malcolm because they understood that Malcolm embraced them.
Right. Now, Alex Lubin, professor and chair of the American Studies Department at the University of New Mexico, said that Malcolm's political philosophy drew from his encounters with pan-Islamist and Arab nationalist social movements. How far do you agree?
I think this
is another transformation, perhaps.
Well, it was the foundation of Malcolm's political philosophy and understanding of the world is based in black internationalism. The response to the fact that black people were enslaved, dispersed, that they had a national experience, and therefore we had to link up among ourselves, but we had to also understand the world. And that was part of the philosophy and perspective of Marcus Garvey and the Garveyite movement. It was part of even the Nation of Islam movement, and it became part of Malcolm's perspective, that one had to understand the world, understand the different kinds of interests that are competing in the world, including religious interests, and to make determinations based on your understanding of the world and history in terms of what kind of route you wanted to follow. And he made his determinations, he made his decisions, and it appeared that he made the correct decisions because, again, the fight that Malcolm embraced in 1964 are the same fights that we are still waging today. And his analysis of who the common enemy is just as relevant today as it was in 1964.
Now they say that who killed Malcolm X matters less than who wanted him dead and ordered it, and why. Why? Yes. Did they want to mute him once and for all?
Because they understood the potential. See, the way that imperialism works is that if they are able to identify leadership that has the potential of uniting masses of people against it, if they can get to that leadership, then they will eliminate it. So it's documented that the authorities in the U.S., the FBI, the CIA, were tracking Malcolm. When Malcolm traveled,
the COINTELPRO, I think this body
was
also
part
that
of
was
the-
tracking all those movements who are working for the civil rights of the African Americans.
exactly, it was part of the FBI's counterintelligence program,
True.
where they targeted our movement, targeted our leadership, our Revolutionary Action Movement, the League of Revolutionary Black Workers, every organization that developed to unite black people and to connect us to the worldwide revolutionary process was targeted by the U.S. authorities. So they had an interest in seeing Malcolm eliminated.
What is, last thing that I'm going to ask you is, what is the most remembered quotation of Malcolm X that you still live by today, Ajama?
I think for many of us is Malcolm's understanding that we had a right and a responsibility to struggle and to fight for our total liberation.
Truth is on the side of the oppressed.
By any means necessary. And that's that one sentence is the thing that scares the oppressor. That basically we say we're not going to live by the ethics of the oppressor. We're saying that basically we're going to free ourselves. We're going to connect ourselves with other people who are struggling for liberation, and collectively we're going to use any means necessary to free ourselves.
Right, international recognized human rights defender Agamo براكا, many thanks indeed for joining us.
Thank you.
You're most welcome, sir. إذا لقاء جديد في الأسبوع المقبل مع ضيف جديد وقضية جديدة ودائما من الداخل. للمزيد من التواصل بريدنا theinside@almayadeen.net وصفحتنا على الفيسبوك من الداخل، من كل فريق عمل من الداخل من كل الميادين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.